Hello, I'm Max, and welcome back to another episode of Learning to Grow. Today, I'm going to be talking about a little experiment I'm doing to see if native soil works as well as potting soil for potting plants. The reason I wanted to try this out is I found that potting soil doesn't work very well after it's used, probably only like once, because it's essentially just kind of fluff with fertilizer in it. And that's mainly for weight reasons, because if they were to use actual soil, it would be like insanely heavy and just like totally impractical for putting in like home improvement stores or for like carrying around. So what they do is they use shredded coconut fiber, loose compost, just things like that, and they mix it with a fertilizer so that in one season you can get really good growth for not a lot of weight and therefore not a lot of cost. But after a season or so, the soil's pretty depleted. So like I don't know if you've ever tried replanting in potting soil that you've already used for a season before, but the plants generally don't do very well. And I was always confused by that until I found out what potting soil actually is made out of and how it's actually not very comparable to real soil. Just as a disclaimer, you can easily revitalize old potting soil by just adding in an appropriate amount of all-purpose fertilizer mix. I just wanted to see if I could get away with potting plants without using any outside inputs. So just as a little experiment, I wanted to try and see if just native soil from the ground outside would work at all as a potting mix. The plant I chose to try this experiment out with was a lemon tree that I got from my sister. She named it Larry, so I'll just call it Larry for the rest of the video. Larry was already starting to get a little too big for his pot, so I needed to pot him up into a larger pot anyway. My thought went that native soil is free because you can just get it off of your property. But it's free and it retains its fertility year after year as long as it's treated well. So if I could take some high quality native soil and just treat it like soil in the outdoors, it could yield pretty good results for a long period of time. The only consideration is that potted plants just don't have as much access to nutrients as plants outside because their roots are confined to such a small space. So potted plants do need some sort of amendment, at least every once in a while, to help maintain fertility. But long story short, I thought that if I treated the soil in the pot just like soil outside, it could remain viable for a really long time. So the side I chose to get the soil from is right next to a river. So there's a lot of silt and a lot of fertility. If you dig down even really deep, the soil is still dark and very loose and just has like a really nice texture. So I figured it would be a good candidate. So the way I collected it is I just dug out shovelfuls and sifted it through a sieve. I think it was probably like half an inch. And any dirt clods that didn't pass through, I just dumped back into the hole and chopped it up with my shovel and then re-sifted it after that. It was actually surprising how heavy this stuff was. I actually needed to put it up into the bed of a side-by-side just to make sure I could get it out of there and get it back where I needed it to be, because it was getting to be like way too heavy to carry. Which shows why most people just use potting soil, because it's definitely a lot simpler. I was really happy with the spot that I picked to collect the soil from because it was very obvious how nice the texture was. Before I added Larry back in the pot, I added in a bunch of leaves that had just fallen from the trees around the house. My idea is that they would break down over time and provide a bunch of added nutrients to Larry as he grows. The only worry I have is that as the leaves break down, it might tie up some nitrogen, but if Larry starts to look a little yellow or weak, I can definitely add in some nitrogen amendment like coffee grounds or manure or just an all-purpose fertilizer mix. Once I had it filled up with leaves, I put Larry in the pot and then I just surrounded it with a bunch of soil that I just collected. I did decide to do an interplanting of microclover to act as like a nice soil barrier and a nitrogen provider. If the clover gets a little bit too big and seems like it's starting to choke Larry out, I'll clear it out, but so far it's not posing any problems. I just figured that since he was confined to a pot, the clover would provide a nice amount of added nitrogen just to help him grow a little bit better. After that, I watered it in and I moved him back into the greenhouse where he'll stay for the rest of the winter. And I'm not kidding about how heavy the soil is. I had to use a dolly because it was way too heavy to pick up. Well, that's all I have for you guys this week. Hopefully you found this interesting, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.